Welcome to Cath Lab Chat, your first and only podcast for Cath Lab professionals. I am your host, Jeremy Miller, and I am super excited to be here. I'm almost as excited as I was for the first episode. Almost. But now we're starting to get things figured out. Nerves are a little bit more calm. I'm still not an audio engineer. I'm a regular old cath lab x-ray tech, and I'm trying to figure this out. So everything's getting a little bit easier. The buttons are getting a little figured out. The editing's getting a little figured out. And the content, well, that we are just exploding with content. So I want to thank everybody right off the bat for promoting the podcast and telling your friends and listening in. With our first episode, we had over 200 downloads in the first 2 weeks, which is about double what a normal podcast gets in its first month. So we already got there in our first 2 weeks. So thanks again for everybody for promoting the podcast and telling your friends and listening in. It makes me feel like I'm doing something worthwhile. So thank you. And I look forward to hearing from you. I've already gotten several more emails from people about ideas they'd like to hear about on the show, and I'm lining those up. Next week, I hope to be talking to Rebecca Jones, the CEO of Sharp Medical Staffing, to get her perspective on how it is to own a staffing company and what their world looks like. But this week, folks, I have Teresa Stevenson on the podcast. She's been a nurse for 36 years. She's currently working in travel leadership. Doesn't that sound fancy? Because it is fancy. And she's also consulting at hospitals. So she's currently my manager, and she is obviously a little bit different. She's not your everyday just come in and fill a hole kind of cath lab manager. She specializes in cath labs that have some really, big challenges. Maybe their lab has become toxic and they just need a leader to come in and help them reshape the lab and turn it around and bring it into a different direction. And that's her specialty. And I think that sets her apart from a lot of other managers and a lot of other people. And honestly, she's one of my most favorite managers of all the managers I've ever had. And I'm super excited to have her on the podcast so you guys can hear what the difference is between a manager and a leader, because I didn't really know the difference, but I can tell you that I feel the difference when I work with her every day. So without further ado, I give you Teresa Stevenson, and I will talk to you guys at the end. So welcome to the show, Teresa. Let's start at the beginning. So what made you decide to become a nurse and why?
Oh, gosh. That's a hard question, because it would be easier for me actually to say what made me decide to become a leader. Nursing, I almost hate to answer this question because it's going to sound so kind of like a pat answer, but it is the truth. And so it's because I wanted to help people.
Perfect. So, you already kind of said it. So let's just go on to why did you decide to become a leader?
Well, that's people that don't really know me maybe wouldn't understand this, but maybe after we're done with the podcast, people will understand me better. And so they'll understand the answer to this question. And so what it came down to for me was I was not really happy with being able to get things done and make things better. I spent some time early on in my career at the bedside, enjoyed that tremendously, met some wonderful people, really made a difference in people's lives, but I was, to be honest, constantly frustrated because I would see things that needed to be fixed, and I would go and tell my manager or my director, whoever would be the person that would be my my one up, if you will. And I would never see things change. And so for me, it became really clear pretty quickly that if I wanted to make things better, I was going to have to get into a position where I had the ability to change things, because I was just frustrated. I always knew that we could do better than some of the answers that I was getting.
Okay, that's a good answer. um, I mean, I think we kind of jumped into it a bit early without some of the background, but I'm glad to see we're getting into it, because I think that one of the things that you see and I see in hospitals is that one of the biggest issues is leadership. And we're not just talking about specific to the cath lab. We're talking about, all departments, where I think it is in general, and most people can agree, that hospitals have people that roll up into management positions because you need to know, department specific information to become a manager, but that doesn't mean that you're a leader. And there's a very big definition difference between the two. And people just assume that because you're a manager that you're a leader, when they're very different things. So while getting into that, we see in a lot of places that you have managers that aren't leaders. So on that, what is a good leader to you?
Oh, very good question. A little bit harder to answer than maybe it sounds like on the surface. There's all kinds of leaders. Some of your informal leaders are some of your best leaders. For example, I worked with I'll call her a young lady because everybody's a young lady to me, or a young man because I'm getting old. But I worked with a young lady by the name of Kelly in Spokane, Washington. Whenever my assignment was to be over, I was over the intensive care unit, the progressive care units, respiratory therapy, and cath lab. So I wore a lot of hats there, but one of the strongest leaders that I met during my time in Spokane was also one of the best leaders, because she just had that personality, and she was totally 100% committed to making sure that the patients got their very best. And so going back to your question between the difference between a manager and a leader, I was able to help her, I guess, smooth out some of her rough edges, and really see her flourish as a leader. And that to me really signifies the difference between what a manager would do and what a leader would do. I think the first thing that has to be there for someone to be a really effective leader, and before I go into that, I always say that I feel sorry for the people that had to work and report to me for my first 5 years of being a leader, because it takes time to learn. And so I made all of the classic mistakes that there are out there. I started out not really listening to my staff. I started out, I would listen to decide how I was going to respond instead of really listening to hear what they had to say. Another classical mistake that I made was I wouldn't find out all sides of the story before I took action. Another one, I would react with emotion whenever I would hear something, only to find out later that it was only partially true. So, unfortunately, sometimes that's how we have to learn. But what I have learned over the years is you have to have a genuine love for the people that are, I guess I would say, under your charge, and for the patients that we serve to be a good leader. So, in other words, it's the things that you hear a lot of times in different motivational videos, but you have to really bring it and put it into action. And so it's things like, the whole notion that, the leader goes last and the staff comes first. And so I would describe myself as a servant leader. And that's because my motivation is to help other people. One of the things that's, I guess, troubling by background, am a nurse, but, there are good and bad leaders of all professions. And so I've always been one of those. I know one of the controversies that always exists in cath labs is, do you have to be a nurse to be a manager or be a director, or can a radiology technologist be an effective leader? It's really more about the person, and it's not so much about title. Now, there are some things that, like, for example, that the Board of Nursing requires, and those things can be addressed. But I've been fortunate enough in my career to help people develop their leadership skills that were nurses, and also people develop their leadership skills that were respiratory therapists, that were radiology technologists. And so it's more about the person. And so what I'm always looking for whenever I'm looking for someone that I want to develop into a leader, it's motivation, right? It's one of those things where motivation does matter. And you want someone that wants to be a leader to help others, that wants to learn the skills to be able to help people. And if you can help develop good leaders, then I think healthcare would be in a lot better position than we are now. One of the things that I see is nursing has changed quite a bit over 35 years. And where people initially would go into nursing to be at the bedside, to take care of patients, they would learn what it's about to take care of patients. And then they would stay close enough, either in contact with the people who are doing the frontline care, or they learn to rely and believe what those people are telling them, even if they were in a position where, for example, if you're a director and you have to spend most of your time in meetings, the most important thing that you can do is believe what your people are telling you.
So I think right there you have what a lot of people have as I see as the biggest insecurity on managers and directors' part, is that there's a lot of people who feel like that their staff are trying to get one over on them. So they're real hesitant to kind of follow what the staff are saying versus what other management are saying. And there's a big push for management to kind of back each other over the staff when it comes to decisions that affect that group of people. And it seems like, one bad apple spoils the bunch kind of when it comes to staff. You have one staff member who constantly bothers management or the director, and then that person is reluctant to get feedback from the staff because they feel like the only person that talks is the negative one, or the person that has an agenda that's other than what the manager wants, or they're unwilling to compromise on a point. Like, for example, like bringing in a policy. Like, I think one of the things that you and I have talked about is a leader will, work with you to bring in a new policy. Like, you might not like the policy change, you might not like the process change, you might not like what it is, but a leader will say, hey, this is what I'm looking to do as a big picture, and this is the way I think we should get there. And then the staff comes along and then they negotiate the how to get there versus the big picture. So then the leader gets the big picture item, which is, I want to reduce turnover times in the cath lab by 5 minutes. And this was a project I worked on over at Kaiser myself. And my manager over there, Tammy McAnani, she was integral in helping me figure out a process, but not commanding it or directing it. Her direction was, I want to reduce it by this goal number. And then I said I would bounce ideas off of her, and she would help guide me to what ended up being the most effective way. But it wasn't her idea, it was my idea. And because it was my idea, I was super excited to talk about it. And then I got the other staff to buy in. So it was more essential that I got to be the person that was standing on the soapbox preaching this than her bringing this idea down. Probably she could have come up with the idea. She's a pretty smart lady. So she probably could have come up with it all on her own and then just tried to enforce it, but then she would have gotten kickback. So kind of back to what you're saying is, a smart leader will listen to their staff. It's just finding a way to listen to your staff. And if that means listening to them tell you your idea back to you, but pretending like it was their idea, then maybe that's the most effective way to do it.
Yeah, exactly. And so a lot of it really ultimately becomes about getting out of your staff's way, right? And so being the type of leader that you really don't have to say that much, because your actions really say everything about what type of environment you want, how you envision the department to be. I'm going to use a little bit of a buzzword here, but a high reliability department. And so, it is important that we do things methodically and that we do things consistently the same way, because it has been proven that patients are less likely to have bad things happen to them whenever we have consistent practices in place. One of the things that I know I talked to you guys about is the importance of handoff communication. And that's because it's not because I'm a genius and I figured this out on my own. It's because it's been proven that that's where patients' safety is the most in jeopardy, because people are busy, people are distracted. And so something as simple as a consistent handoff communication tool that really makes sense for the department and really centers around what type of work that you're doing, has to be implemented. And let the staff do the work, come up with what works for them, rather than me trying to hand you guys a piece of paper and say, do this. Because my perspective is not going to be the best one, because I don't do the work day in and day out. So it's really ultimately becomes about things. And I know Quint Studer has done a lot of work on this and continues to be one of the leaders in, healthcare leadership and how to be a good leader. Really, it's a concept that makes a lot of sense. You want to spend 80% of your time on the top performing individuals. And what hospitals, unfortunately, and leaders end up falling into the trap of spending 80% of their time on the bottom 20% of the staff. In other words, the ones that are disgruntled, that are maybe fault finders. Yes, you have to be fair to those people. Yes, you have to believe that you can ultimately make a decision. But if you spend all of your time on the people that are problematic and don't try to retain your best and brightest employees, then that's when it becomes a downward spiral, right? And so you end up not retaining people because they think that the leader doesn't care about them. They think that the leader doesn't see what they're doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that also kind of one of the things that we can just touch on for a second is that your your best and brightest doesn't always necessarily mean that they agree with you as a manager, as a leader. That they can disagree with you, but they can still be worth your time, and that your best and brightest have a tendency to be those who can just respectfully agree to disagree and still support an idea even though they're not on board with it.
Yeah. And that takes a certain amount of humility. And so that's one of the, I guess, the best lessons that any leader can learn is that it's not about them, it's not personal. And as it kind of goes back to what I was saying before about getting out of the way and letting people flourish and really do not take it personally because everyone is not going to agree on everything. So say what you want the team member to hear, listen to what they have to say. Sometimes at the end of that conversation, it may be just like you said, you're going to agree to disagree. But the most important thing that you can do is come back the next day and treat that person like they're your most valuable employee because they are. I'll put it in the in the form of a question and say, who's going to give me the most information that I need to run my department effectively? Someone who just tells me what I want to hear, or someone who will give me honest feedback about what needs to, in their view, happen. And so then that gives me something to think about. I can talk to other people and see what their thoughts are. But the staff is not going to share what I will call vulnerable information if they know that you're going to hold a grudge.
Mm-hmm.
You're only going to hear what the staff thinks you want them to say.
Okay. So also on the other side of that, there's you can't listen to only the people that have something negative to say. I think that, it's encouraged. I think you encourage it that if you have a complaint, there should be some kind of constructive criticism behind it. Like, this is horrible. This is what we should do. Not, this is horrible. You should fix it. I think that is one of the big things that, that's the telltale sign of a disgruntled employee is, this is wrong, that's wrong, this is wrong. Okay, well, how should we fix it? Well, that's your job. I don't get paid for that. That's above my pay grade. In general, I find that those people are just detractors from it. And I think that, like you said, you should spend 80% of your time on your top performers and 20% on the bottom performers, because I believe in general that the people that are constantly at war with management over everything get the most attention. And then people see that like, well, I'm never in the boss's office because I don't ever have anything to complain about, but I have all these great ideas.
Right. And then that's where you get into a position where a boss, all that the leader is doing is just putting out fires. And so once a department or an organization gets broken, so to speak, to that extent, that's when you have people like me who come in and consult and try to help and rebuild departments and rebuild organizations. The sad truth, Jeremy, is that once a department is eroded and becomes, and I'll use air quotes here, but broken, it didn't get that way overnight, and it doesn't get fixed overnight. So you have to convince people and get them to buy in to the process of making things better. Really, it's a concept of taking one bite of the elephant at a time, and you just have to keep plugging away at it. And don't forget to do the things like the thank you notes when you see a good job done. And be specific about what the employee did right. And so it takes a lot of little things like that. And I think, as I said before, just learning to be a part of that team and just be humble and genuinely want to help make things better. And it's not about, you as the leader.
So while you're fixing things in a department, as you come in and you often do, you have to train other leaders. And I mean, obviously, you talked about identifying those other leaders as being the people that are more motivated. What are things that you do to train leaders to kind of, like you said, smooth out the rough edges, things like that? What are basic kind of like, what's your basic playbook when you come in and you identify you have a leader and now you want to set this person in the path to being a leader in the department?
Yeah. And that's an excellent question. And what the job of a leader, you'd be amazed how many different scopes and different hats that you have to wear. So part of what you do is you're an educator. And so we're obliged as leaders, and I don't see a lot of leaders do this, where you put together different classes and help people learn how to be. We just finished going through a class with both our unit practice council and with our charge nurse group that we talked about. And I've done this at every organization that I've been at, but it's about developing your authentic leadership style and how to stay on track and how to not get lost on your journey of leadership. So you have to be an educator, you have to be a mentor, you have to be, and I guess probably some people would say that a friend is not the right term to use here, but you really do have to have that kind of relationship with people so that they know that you're just not trying to get something from them, that you really care about them as a person, and that you would go out of your way for them in real, tangible ways if they needed something. And I mean, I can give you lots of examples how I've seen that play out. And that's, if you're really a servant leader, then you may have to go pick up an employee who doesn't have a ride to work. You may have to, one of the things that I went through in my leadership career was one of our very best employees passed away, and she was young, and she had a daughter that was in nursing school. And so we, as her coworkers and as her leaders, we took on, and the doctors, of course, that she worked with, everybody, every part of the team picked up and made sure that her daughter was able to finish nursing school. And so, yeah, I mean, it's not for sissies, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. You have to really be bought in.
So with that, like, I say that a lot. So with that, that's probably should be not something I say all the time. So when you're in a situation when you're brought in, because you're specifically brought in for labs that need help. You're not brought in because there's a manager position that's available. You're kind of brought in for specific departments that have had troubled histories, and you come in and you help turn them around. So besides identifying good leaders and helping them to grow, how do you motivate a group of people? And we all know that those groups are mixed. You have your high performers who are happy to see things different. You have your middle of the road group that's pretty happy to kind of one way or the other. And then you have the bottom group who are just angry about everything and don't want to see anything different. How do you get to the whole team to motivate the group without getting it sucked down the drain of those same people?
Yeah. And this is where I go back and follow the Studer model, where you identify your high performers, you identify your solid performers, and you identify your low performers. So this is strictly a management exercise that leaders go through in private. And one of the things that's important about it is that you make sure that you know the people well. You don't want to make any quick assessments. You have to have some time, because everybody's going to be nice to you at first, right? Everybody's going, it's like they're dating you, and so they want to be on their best behavior. So it's a simple exercise, and you identify your top performers, and you re-recruit those people every day. So it's something as simple as you don't pass them in the hall without saying hello. You talk to them about their family and the things that they take an interest in, you take an interest in. It's just going above and beyond and building that relationship with them. And if you do that, then employees, staff members, co-workers will genuinely follow you and your lead pretty much anywhere if they feel like you genuinely care about them as a person. Do you find that to be accurate?
I do, and I think that I think one of the things that you're talking about without talking about it is when people see change, the biggest thing is insecurity. People don't know how it is on the other side. So in order to get people to embrace change, they have to trust that you have their best interest at heart. So in general, you're talking about gaining the trust of the group of people one at a time, so that when you're in the group dynamic and you introduce something scary and new, that they're not going to run away, that they're going to be like, let's take a minute, give it a second, and try it out and see how it goes. So I think with me, one of the things we did at Kaiser, that as part of their, they call it UBT, their unit-based teams, is everything was a pilot project. It didn't matter if this was exactly how it was going to be done. It was introduced as a pilot, and then you would try it. And then people had a chance to complain or give feedback. Complain was usually what really happened. But they had an opportunity to do what they felt was change it, even though management never had any idea of changing it. They were going to introduce it exactly the way that they said they were going to, and that they tried it out. You got a chance to give feedback. Now you feel better, and then we implement it. And I think that really helped help people understand or feel a part of the change, because sometimes things were identified that helped change the course of it. So when you were there, you trusted in the fact that if there was something majorly wrong, you could potentially have a say that altered the way the plan rolled out, but everybody kind of really knew that you were not going to completely dismantle the project. The project was coming, and you just had a chance to help steer it. You were going to lose the fight, but you were going to steer the direction of the project in as best you could. So you might as well invest in it so you could steer it so it could work for you, rather than you're just fighting it 100%. Because you might as well just make it work for you rather than fight it the whole way. And I think that was one of the ways that Kaiser in the UBT projects would help it. Like I was talking about earlier, that was a UBT project. I'm making Kaiser more efficient, and somehow it's my idea how we do it. I think my manager to this day laughs because I'm pretty sure the whole thing was her idea. but she made me feel good about it. I had projects, I had whiteboards and big sheets with it all spelled out. I learned about flow mapping and process mapping and putting it on a table. That was definitely new for me. And it's good to involve people in a process, no matter how small, because it makes them feel a part of it. And if you feel a part of it and you've learned something new, like I went home and tried to learn this software my wife taught me how to use about process mapping, I felt just a little bit smarter. And when you talk about process mapping and you want to go look for a new job and you've done performance improvement projects, because managers love those, as an employee, you don't have to be a manager. You can just be somebody who's been a part of those projects. You say those buzzwords and immediately people know, oh, this person's going to have buy-in. And if you have buy-in, you're more likely to be listened to. When you have criticism, when you're like, whoa, 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 this is a big problem, you're going to have that relationship like you talked about, that you can say, hey, this really isn't working. And then you'll actually get some feedback of, oh, okay, well, what do you think we should do different? Why do you think we should do this different? And you'll get that relationship with your manager, and it'll help guide all your future things, because everybody wants their department to be great. Everybody wants to, most people want to work at a place that they're proud of and they're happy to be there. So if you're willing to buy into new projects and you trust that your manager or your director or whoever your leader is taking you in a good direction, then you want to be in those processes. It's when you don't feel that your best interests are at heart, that's when people are fighting it. But in general, you're going to get mixed into those group of people that just hate everything. So it's really hard to be giving feedback if you haven't identified yourself as somebody who actually cares enough to give constructive feedback.
Well, and that's exactly what we were just saying, because you wouldn't have been able to accomplish what you did if your director, manager, leader had not earned your trust. And so that's where it starts, because you can be vulnerable, if that's a word that we can use, and you know that person's going to have your back, and so you can be your best self. And so one of the things that's an absolute truth is that people want to be a part of meaningful work, right? Mm-hmm. And so they want to have good relationships at home, but then we also have to spend a fair amount of time at work. And so people want those relationships and their work to be meaningful. And they also want to be able to give their optimum contribution. And so part of what a good leader does is they find out their team members' strengths and weaknesses, and what are their career goals? Where do they want to be? And then you help them achieve those goals. And then if you have everybody moving toward a goal that they want to achieve, then it goes back to what I said before. You can kind of get out of their way and let them do the work, and then just be there as a support system. It takes a while to get there, as I said, after things kind of break down. And the other thing that's important to remember is that it's can be tough to maintain. It's just like, maybe maintaining a car. You have to put the work and energy into it to make sure that it stays on track. And so one thing that I did want to mention before we get off on other subjects is one of the things that makes that, and I know people, I'd like to give them some answers to why, in particular, cath labs seem to have a tendency to have challenges with quality leadership, with people all going in the same direction. And because you hear a lot in cath labs about the nurses versus the techs. And I think one of the things that's hurting us in our culture today, so I think just maybe knowing this will help people to do what they can to avoid it. People are generally today, as far as the leadership group, a lot of them are on what they would consider an upward trajectory career path, where they want to be the CEO, they want to be the COO, and so when you have a lot of that movement going on, it can be difficult to maintain momentum, because as people get more and more education, they're all on their way somewhere else. And so it's important to have the people that stay. Does that make sense?
Yeah. That continuity in leadership.
Yeah.
So when I think one of the biggest misconceptions about exactly what you're talking about is when you have the nurse versus tech idea. I think that one of the things that makes the cath lab special is twofold. Is one, there is that dynamic of the different working groups together. You really nowhere else in a hospital do you have a group that is separate but equal. And I hate to use that, but it's true. It's separate but equal. And so always one is going to feel more valuable than the other. And in California, it is that way. It is, the nurses are more valuable because they have stronger unions and they get paid more. And that's just the way it is. So some people feel that because you're paid more, that makes you more valuable, while other people feel that your relationship or closeness with the physician decides your value. And the reality is that we all do the job together as a team. So, you know, in a perfect world, we're all paid. We're all paid at the same scale. We're all paid equally on experience. So we all do everybody's job, except for the nurses don't step on the pedal and the techs don't give drugs. In a perfect world. But in the reality of that, we have to have separate job titles because we live in a state where the nurses make the rules. And that's just the way it is. There's no fighting it and there's no reason to fight it. We just accept it. And because of that, we have this dynamic between the two groups. And that makes cath labs a particularly tricky place to manage, because nurses are not going to be well received by techs, and techs are not going to be well received by nurses in leadership positions. So that creates this false animosity that doesn't really mean anything, but people take it very seriously. And then, you know, if one group seems to think that they have an idea about the other group's job, the other group gets offended. In reality, it's like we're all just working together. And if people start to see the big picture and know that we're a team, that's when it's the most important, working as a unit, as a group to help each other rather than to take each other down. But more specifically as to the leadership portion, it is such a specific department with these very specific needs, and the, you know, managers have a tendency to like their own. So if you're a nurse and you're in management, you have a tendency to identify with your job group more. And that's just human nature. But is that the way it always is? No, it's not the way it always is. It's just the way it is sometimes, or that's the way it's perceived. So when it comes to managers, we don't see a lot of managers because there's just not a lot of managers in cath labs. You know, there's a small number of overall cath labs in this country, and then there's an even smaller amount of managers that have come from the lab. And then how many good ones there's going to be good ones and there's going to be bad ones. And it just seems as though the turnover, like you said, the people going up the ladder end up becoming, you know, you have a really good manager and then they turn into a really good director. And then next thing you know, you don't have them anymore. And it's good for them, but it's bad for you because they don't often have the best replacement come in.
And so it's important to realize that we have some significant forces that are working against us. And sometimes that's half the battle, right? So you know that you have turnover. You have a much more mobile workforce than you used to have years ago. And then you have people that really are very career minded that want to move up the ladder. And so, I have learned over the years, because whenever I started out, I thought that, it had to be a nurse. But I have found that it's more based on the person, the individual person, and their ability to lead. And to do that, you have to not believe that one is better than the other. I kind of compare it to a body. I mean, how would a body look with, 4 arms? We don't need 4 arms. We need 2 arms and 2 legs. And so what I excel at is probably not, as a nurse, is not going to be the same thing that you excel at as a rad tech. And so it takes both of us. And just to build that mutual respect, because goodness knows I can't do what you guys do as techs. A lot of respect for what you guys do. I probably earlier in my career would have liked to have learned to scrub. I never did, but I just, my hat's off to y'all, because the knowledge level, and to always get it right, and to stand there sometime for hours on end. And so I really think it sounds kind of cliche, but it's really about getting the best work out of each person and respecting them for who they are. And I think that's the framework that has to be there if we ever hope to reduce or end this battle between nurses and techs.
So let me ask you this, because this is also a project that we're working on now, is that I have found in the best team units, you have the most crossover of jobs. So the nurses scrub, the techs monitor, the techs circulate. The nurses, the only difference is the techs don't sedate and the nurses don't step on the pedal. So obviously there has to be that separation there because of licensing, which is what all got us the job in the first place.
Right.
But I feel that when you have those departments where everybody does everything, you have the most mutual respect for the other department. And I find that, like, when I first started, I worked in a department where I panned at the end of the table, and then we would have a nurse scrub, and then a nurse would monitor and sedate, as horrible as that sounds. But then we would rotate sometimes, and then I would scrub, and then there would be another tech that would pan, and then one nurse. And because of that model, I learned more about nursing because I had to help. She needed me. That other person needed me to be like a nurse. Yeah. And I needed to learn those skills, and I didn't have those skills as a tech. So in order for this to work, I needed to learn in a hurry how to help that person. And I've carried those skills throughout. And we had one of the best teams, because when we had 2 nurses and a tech and there was an issue, they had to be a tech. They had to reach out and help me be a tech. They had to know the equipment like I knew the equipment, and that was my job. I had to pan and circulate the room and open up equipment. And as those people were scrubbed in, they had to know how to put everything together, and they had to know how to operate things in the event that I was busy doing something else. So in those, I find those are like the highest performing teams. And now we're in the midst of a project where we're working on a lab where the techs don't monitor. We're trying to bring the techs to the monitor, and then after that, we will have the nurses scrub cases that they can scrub. And there's obviously a lot of resistance to that, but I think that once we get there, I think that everybody wants to teach people something, whether they want to admit it or not. And I think once we get to the point where we're having the nurses teach the techs how to monitor, there's so much like joy in having them being able to express something that they like to do and that the techs want to learn. Like you feel good when somebody wants to learn something from you and you feel a compliment, like you do this really well. I want to learn from you how to do this. Like that's way different than I'm taking your job and there's nothing you can do about it. And when you can switch off and help each other in just the little ways, like, oh, let me go back and start the monitor for you because I'm extra and I'm not busy and now I know how, versus I can't help you, I'm just a tech, and that whole just a tech thing is.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to the basic premise that we may think that we know what it's like to walk in that other person's shoes, but until you've actually done it, you really don't know. You can be as sympathetic and as empathetic as you possibly can, but I think you've hit the nail on the head when you said, it's important for us to be able to interchange jobs.
It's good for the team to interchange jobs. Is that where you're going? That's all right.
Because it builds that mutual respect that we were talking about earlier. And the most important role that the leader plays in that is to not let the people that just want to say, it is easy to always say what's wrong. Anybody can do that. That's not hard to do. And we have those people in the lab that, they can pick out the things that are wrong about something or the reasons we shouldn't do something. They're very talented at that. But you just have to have, utilize your 80% of your high performers and solid performers and move forward and not let those people drive where you're going. And I'd like to see labs that have a combination of leadership. I think that that's the best way to go. And then if you have a tech leader in the department and you have a nurse leader in the department and they can have a mutual understanding of this is where we want to go, this is where we want to take the team. And then, I can lead the techs sometimes when they need me to. You can lead the nurses sometimes when we need you to. And title really becomes unimportant. And it becomes about really being able to, again, do the best for the people.
Yeah, I agree. I think you hit the nail on the head with that because I have felt a massive difference in how I view things. I've always been like a de facto lead tech, but now I'm an official lead tech. And being an official lead tech, one of the best things, the best days early on in my time at this hospital was I had a nurse come to me when they were trying to make assignments for the board, and they really wanted to talk through their ideas of why they were picking different staff for different rooms and different cases. And I had completely different, like almost the opposite of why I would do something different. And they looked at me and then they did exactly what I said for the reasons I said it. Only with the techs. With the nurses, they had made those decisions. That's fine. But with the different cases, and I just kind of went, oh, this is what it's like. And there was no, I'm a nurse, you're a tech. It was, let's work this together. And I'm a nurse and you're a tech. Let's work this out. And I think that was one of the best days of my job. That was one of the best days I had ever, was just that feeling of we are both leading our teams and we both want what's best for our teams, and me wanting what's best for my team has nothing to do with you wanting what's best for yours, and we can both get what we want, and all we got to do is talk. And I think that was the best day at my career at this current hospital. So I know we've been going for a while, but I do want to get into a couple of quick things because even though you're a special manager, you're still a manager. And one of the things I've talked about on this podcast is, or I will talk about if I haven't got to it yet, is coming into the lab new and, from fresh and then talk. One of the things I've talked about on the podcast is coming into the lab with no experience and then, getting a job if you have experience. So just about hiring, I'm going to talk about hiring travelers and hiring regular staff. When you hire somebody or when you decide you're going to take a chance on somebody, how do you decide you're going to take a chance on someone with no experience, like a tech or a nurse?
Excellent question. And so I'll start with saying that it's much easier and you're much better off to not hire the wrong person to begin with. So if you're in doubt, don't hire them. Once you've hired someone, you, especially in a state that's so heavily union influenced, I guess I'll say, you're pretty committed to that person. So making the right hire is extremely important. And so to get the right hire, you have to spend the time. It's just like anything else. You can, take the time to make the call to the personal references. Take the time to make the call to a previous manager. Cath labs are generally a pretty small world. And so anybody can, or most people can perform well in an interview. But you, as a leader, having had some experience, know that you need to, what is it? They say you have to verify, of course, right? And so, and it's important to do all the different levels of interviews because someone that I like and feel like it's a good fit, if you don't have that peer interview group, then you may pick a person that's a good technologist or a good nurse, but they're not going to fit into the group necessarily. And plus, whenever you have the peer interview, then obviously what you're telling the employees is that your opinion matters, right? And we care about what you think, and we're not just going to make the decision as leaders and then you have to live with the consequences of that. But as far as my part of the interview process, what I do specifically to make sure I can get to whether that person truly is going to exhibit what I need them to, which is total commitment to that patient. And so if they can't they can't answer a question, for example, if they can't tell me an example of a time where they went out of their way to help a patient, and they just try to give me a general answer there, then they're probably not going to be a good fit for the organization because it's like one of those things there's no such thing. We've moved past the point where, you're a good nurse, or you're a good tech, and what would follow the but would be, they can't get along with anybody, that type of thing. They're meaner than a skunk, those type of things. That there's no such thing as just having skills anymore. You have to be able to interact with people in a positive way. If you're not able to treat every patient like they're your mother, your brother, your sister, then we really don't need you as part of the team. And so skip that hire. Save yourself a lot of trouble, save the team a lot of trouble. And there's ways to find out by the questions that you ask. And there's plenty of references online where you can go and look for open-ended questions that you can ask during an interview. And so just save yourself time, save yourself trouble. Don't hire just because you're desperate to get a warm body. You'll pay for it down the road.
So on the other side of that, you kind of answered a little bit. What are the red flags you're looking for? Like you said, somebody who can't answer that question. Are there other red flags that you look for? Like, I think everybody kind of knows the common ones, like, gaps in work history and things of that nature. Like, when you look at it, because, everybody talks about how, the cath lab is a small world. We just all avoid the legal implications that creates with not really supposing to use that as an avenue of information, but we all do. But we're going to pretend for a second that we don't, and everything's 100% legal. What is something somebody says, in an interview that, like, these are like just huge red flags, and you immediately go, oh, never mind.
Yeah. And so a lot of times you can tell by the resume is the first thing that we have to realize. If it's not well put together, if there's lots of typos or inability to put together a complete sentence, those are things that would make you have pause. And then another thing that's important from an HR perspective, make sure that your job description lists out the expectations of what you want from that employee so that they know from the beginning what you're looking for. And if you do find a person that you feel like is a fit, tell them the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so by doing that, you're already building trust, right? So if you tell them that this is our strengths as a department, this is our weaknesses as a department, tell them, what team they're going to be a part of. And if they're waiting for example, to get, to move up to another team or another shift, be realistic with them about how long that's going to take. So the worst thing that you could do is set an unreasonable expectation so that the employee, just to get them in the door. Because it builds because it sets the relationship because it establishes the relationship based on a falsehood, right? And so how can you're already having to backpedal and try to earn that employee's trust because you've been less than honest with them just to try to get them in the door. That doesn't help anybody.
Okay. So on one of the podcasts, I talked to trainees specifically, and one of the things I talk about is if you want to be in the cath lab and you want them to take a chance on you, that your interview starts before the interview. And one of the things I talk about is how you should go do some kind of observation. The more hours, the better. So if, let's say, you work at where we work at, or how one of our coworkers likes to say, St. Elsewhere. If you work at St. Elsewhere and you really want to get a job at the cath lab at St. Elsewhere, and you don't have any experience, I think the best thing that you can do to show people you're serious is to go down there when you're not on the clock and go shadow for, I said, 32 to 40 hours. Like, really make the commitment to be there and understand the job, because I don't think people understand the job. So other than shadowing in the department, Or do you even think that's a good idea? Do you think that's a good idea for trainees or somebody who wants to be a trainee in the lab who's never done it before? Like, what ideas would you give them to get a lab to take a chance on them?
Yeah, that's an excellent idea. What you have to keep in mind, though, is that the job market is significantly different across the country. And so, where out here in California, where there are people, we're sitting here talking in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is one of the highest, if not the highest, paid because of the cost of living areas. So there are a lot of people who want full-time jobs as technologists and registered nurses in this area. As we talked about, I've been all over the country. And so that doesn't hold true for every area of the country. And so, but if you're in a high demand area where people want to, you have maybe more of a pool of talent than you have available jobs, then yeah, you're going to have to go out of your way and you're going to have to go above and beyond to sell yourself.
So I think that's good. As far as travelers go,
Yeah.
what do you? Because obviously that's a different group entirely than uh, full-time staff. So as far as travelers go, what do you look for in travelers? You know, not only their resume but their interview. What do you look for in a traveler, and how do you get a good feeling or a bad feeling about a traveler?
Well, and that's where it's important that you have a leader that has a background in the department that they're interviewing for. And so it's important for me during a traveler interview to talk about what type of cases they've done and let them tell me some specifics about the type of equipment and even describe some cases for me where there was maybe a particularly complex case so that I know that they know what they're doing. And one of the things that I see that's a frequent mistake when hiring travelers is you have to look at what they may have had, let's say, 6 years of experience in a cath lab, but what type of cath lab was it? Was it a cath lab where they did 10 STEMIs a week and they do Impellas and they do balloon pumps and, they have TAVRs and they do, 40 cases a week? Or is it a lab where, they only do maybe 1 or 2 cases a day? So it's important to understand what type of lab, because there is a huge difference in the type of work that's done in various labs across the country. And I have honestly seen travelers come on board that oversold themselves, really said that they could do some things that they were really not prepared to do. I also want to say, though, that I think that travelers get a bad rap because it is hard for them to come in and prove themselves quickly and be accepted by the team. And so one of the things that I want to always make clear to my full-time team is to accept the travelers, make them feel like they're part of the team. You have to remember they're a long ways from home. They're there to help you out. It's one of those times where bullying is never acceptable, but I've seen it happen where for some reasons people tend to think that travelers are fair game. And, if we treat a traveler that way, then that's who we are, right? And so whoever kind of how you treat, I guess, the most vulnerable among you says a lot about who you are as a team. And so that's one of the things that's important to me, is that we be people of character. And I think that's one of the reasons that we're able to have some success in our departments where I'm involved, because people become actually the best version of themselves because they know that's the expectation.
Okay. Well, I think I have talked your ear off enough and wasted enough of your time. So I think I'm going to end it here, guys. If you guys have any questions for me or for Teresa, I can always forward them to her, or I can ask her myself. I see her every day. And once again, a special thank you to Teresa for being on the podcast. And sorry for the awkward ending, guys. I'm still working out the bugs, but that was awesome. I learned a lot about what it is to be a leader in the Cath Lab, and I can tell you that it's tried and true. Everything she says, she does, and I can attest to it. So I'm super thankful to have her in my Cath Lab right now. And if you're lucky enough one day, maybe she will come be the Mary Poppins of your Cath Lab and help you turn things around too. So if you guys have any questions for her, or you want to get in contact with her, or you want to get in contact with me, hit me up at the email at cathlabchat@gmail.com. Leave me a message on the Facebook page, or you can leave me a message through the website at cathlabchat.com. Also, guys, I hate to do this, but I have to. If you guys want to donate money to the podcast so I can keep going and maybe work a little bit less, so I can work on this a little bit more, maybe go from bi-weekly to weekly, feel free to leave some money at the donation page. It's a Patreon website, which is a way a lot of podcasters end up getting funding. So just click the donate button on the website right there, and I would greatly appreciate it. Also, I just want to thank you guys one more time for spreading the word, and I can't wait to hear from you about more things that you want to talk about. And I look forward to the next week with Rebecca Jones. I think that's going to be a great podcast, and I hope you guys enjoyed as much as I did. Thank you.